Welcome, everyone. Welcome back. I'm so happy. We have a wonderful guest today. We have musicologist Professor Guido Olivieri from the Butler School of Music at the University of Texas at Austin. He is the author of String Virtuosi in 18th Century Naples, Culture, Power, and Music Institutions, a really terrific book. And he is here on the show to discuss the book and all the research. It's really a pleasure. Professor Olivieri, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure for me to be here.
Can you tell me a little bit about your background?
Yeah, well, I was born in Naples. I studied in
You're a real
I'm a real
Neapolitan. You're the real deal.
yeah. I studied at the University of Naples, Federico II, and I studied history of music, musicology, and then after graduated from there. I spent a year in Liverpool studying with Professor Michael Talbot, who is a great expert and major scholar on Vivaldi. And then I applied for a PhD study in the United States and have been in the United States for the past 25 years. I graduated.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. I got my PhD from the University of California, Santa Barbara. It was a beautiful program. And then after a while, some postdocs, etc., I ended up teaching here at the University of Texas, Austin. So it's been almost 20 years here in Austin.
Mm. Now, did you because of your background, Naples, Italy, is that why you decided to focus on this Naples, the string virtuosi? I mean, as a musicologist, I'm sure you've really tackled many things. What particular made you come to this research for this book in particular?
Yeah, well, the book is the results of almost 30 years of research.
Wow.
I started study this as a undergraduate in Naples, and then my first article is actually was actually published in 1996. So you can make the math. And we'll come back and I'll explain why, perhaps why it took a little bit longer. But definitely, I mean, I was attracted to Neapolitan music certainly because I was from there. I was also finishing my diploma in violin, so I got interested also in finding something that could connect these two sides of my experience: the experience as a musicologist, history of music, scholar, with the idea of performance and practical music, right? So finding a repertoire that I could, in a sense, I could play, and then I mean. I'm teaching this semester a course on research and for DMA students, and there is a beautiful sentence from a book by Turabian about research, and something that I always quote in my class: finding the odds in the commonplace, right? So finding something, a different perspective in something, in some topic or some subjects that are already well known, and you'll find a good topic. At the time, I didn't know this. It was more instinct and interest, but certainly I was struck by the fact that Neapolitan music has always been identified with opera in the 18th century, right? So Neapolitan opera and all the great composers, Vinci, Jomelli, Piccini, etc. And then nobody talked about instrumental music, and I was wondering, well, yes, great operas, but who was playing in the pit, right, in the orchestra, right? And there was no information about that. I found out that really very very few articles. I could count maybe five of them would talk about string music in Naples,
Did
because
did didn't people when did people record like Leonardo Leo, Durante, and because I know there are cello concertos and a
yeah.
bunch of was the recording happening in the 20th century, or did that happen relatively recently?
No, there were a few recordings. I still remember one LP that was recorded by some Neapolitan performers, which included some sonatas by Ragazzi, for example. But there were certainly those were certainly the exceptions. I think that in the 90s, even late 90s, we started to see growing a little bit this interest about on the for example the Leo's cello concertos and some sections of this repertoire. I mean, Leo concertos, the cello concertos were well known, but not so frequently performed. I would say that in the past perhaps 20 years, maybe from the beginning of this century, we have started to see really a blooming of interest, not only on the usual repertory, but also on less known composers and sonatas and repertoire in general from
We
Naples.
say less known today, but that's not what the case was back then, right? I mean,
Yeah,
that was they were not less known back then.
right, and this is, in a sense, the discovery that I made with a lot of excitement when I started, because, as I said, I had to start almost from scratch. There were very few articles that talked about one or two composers, and I started digging and going into the archives and trying to find out who these performers were. And what I discovered, I couldn't know at the beginning, of course, but I discovered gradually that they were not at all unknown and were very famous. They Some of them traveled from Naples to other centers, and they were both violinists and cello players, very influential, actually. And what my book, this recent book, tries to demonstrate is exactly that there was a very strong, lively, and influential school in Naples of instrumental music. So, yes, perhaps those are names that we are not familiar with today, but definitely they were well known and very much into the mainstream of development of music at the time.
Mhm.
And
Can I? Oh,
yeah,
sorry. Go ahead.
no, please.
Oh well, we have a wonderful itemized list of things to get through, and I hope we because I go on tangents, and I really apologize to my audience too. Sometimes I just want to ask a question, which is curious: is you're from Naples? Did the word was partimento growing up in Naples? Is that rediscovered, or did you always know the word partimento?
No, the word partimento, I should say, I'm not. That's not the focus of my scholarship, of course. But the
Yep.
word partimento was, in a sense, lost. I studied at the conservatory as well, violin. As I said, I took a diploma there, and I studied for a little bit harmony. Uh, some of the principles of that you find in the partimento, right? The description, for example, the rule of the octave, etc., was still transmitted, communicated, and taught at the conservatory by some teachers. So when there's been this, in a sense, this rediscovery of the partimento tradition in the past 10, 15 years. Some of the aspects of the partimento, although we didn't call it partimento, some of those aspects were familiar to the musicians in Naples, but not in such a systematic way. Then, of course, I mean, I was personally a little bit more familiar with that for a practical reason, because I was studying in Naples, and as you know, together with Rosa Cafiero, I think you had
Yeah.
there, and she
Great
was
scholar.
actually, yeah, and she was actually starting to look at the partimento tradition. So the word partimento was circulating into in the area of history of music in Naples, and that was a very recent institution in the 1980s when I started there. I arrived a few years later than Rosa, and she was already looking at this repertory. I think that so it was known by some few, and they had started to study this. I think the great success and explosion, in a sense, of the study of partimento has happened in the past 15 years, thanks to the books by Bob Gerding and Giorgio Sanguinetti. They really put all the theory out there, and I think that there has been a lot of good reception. And I think that these things are a little bit a circle. I think that it was also the right time, because there has been an interest on Neapolitan music beyond opera in general. So, I mean, the partimento, the rediscovery of the instrumental music, are part of this larger interest in rediscovering a musical culture in Naples in the 18th century.
Right, right. Now let's talk about string sonatas.
Yeah.
So we think of Haydn with the string quartet, and it starts with him. But he had a Neapolitan teacher. He had Nicola Porpora.
Yeah.
And but you can tell me, you're a string player and you've done the digging. So what was the string sonata like in Naples in the 18th century?
Right. It was a very lively scene in Naples for string players. Um, First of all, there was a strong connection between Naples and Rome, and I like to relate very often this anecdote that is um related and included in Charles Barney's History of Music. And it has to do with Corelli and Corelli's visit in Naples in 1702, in the early years of the century. And Burney tells, I mean, he relate a story, an anecdote that he had listened from the violinist, famous violinist Francesco Geminiani, and we'll come back to Geminiani in a moment. So he says that there were these great celebrations because the king of Spain was visiting the city, so they wanted to organize celebrations and put together an opera by Scarlatti, and they decided to invite the best violinist in Europe at the time, the divine Arcangelo Corelli. So Corelli was very reluctant, and then he decided to accept the invitation. He came to Naples with his professional and companion in life, Matteo Fornari, his second violin, they arrived in Naples because he was a little bit dubious about the fact that he could play with Neapolitan string players. And the anecdote goes that he was playing this opera by Scarlatti, and all of a sudden he came to a passage that he was not able to play. He did a mistake. So Scarlatti stopped the rehearsal and said, "Okay, let's go back. Let's start again." And the second time, Corelli again made a mistake on that passage, but he was surprised that the first violin of the orchestra, the Neapolitan orchestra, Petrillo, was able to play this passage without any problem, with a lot of agility
Mm.
um, and talent. And he turns toward Matteo Fornari, his second violin, and says, "Oh, si suona a Napoli. They play in Naples." Now, this is, of course, an anecdote. We don't know if it's true, it's not true. It seems really many of the Corelli's biographers have said it's
Mm.
impossible that Corelli could make mistakes of this kind. But it's interesting, the anecdotes, because, first of all, there are several elements that are true. I mean,
Mm.
um, found that the date corresponds perfectly with the visit of the king. Corelli was indeed invited in Naples. We have documents that say that he was. They were waiting for his arrival in Naples. He
Mm.
he played in a Scarlatti's opera. So all these elements are fine. And then all of a sudden, I was curious at the beginning to find out who was this Petrillo that is named there,
Mm.
first violin of the orchestra. And I found out that he was, in fact, Pietro Marchitelli, the name of the first violin. Pietro Marchitelli, Petrillo, sometimes called, because
Mhm.
he started very young. And so all the elements of this story really uh, are real, are
Mm.
true. Uh, what is interesting is not if Corelli did or not a mistake, if Petrillo was better than Corelli,
Mm.
but what I found interesting is the fact that this demonstrates the fact that in Naples there was a very strong string tradition. And uh, I said this episode, this anecdote was related to Barney by Geminiani,
Mm.
and all the biographers of Geminiani tell us that he spent some time in Naples. But this was also, common knowledge without any evidence. Why, when I started uh, digging into the archive, I was lucky enough to find actually the first document that proves the fact that Geminiani spent some time, probably a year or several years in Naples, very early in his career. He was 20 only in 1707 as first violin of an orchestra, not the Royal Chapel, but another orchestra in a theater. So he was in Naples. He actually had left his hometown to find a job in Naples, and we are talking about one of the greatest virtuosi of the
Mm.
time working in Naples. Something that nobody had found evidence of before.
Yeah.
So it seems that very clear, right, that Naples was
Yeah.
a hotspot of a hub of virtuosi string players at the time already.
It's very interesting because when I did a lot of interviews with jazz musicians in the earlier part of the show, and I read a lot of biographies, one of my favorite pianists was Bud Powell, who's a jazz pianist. And it's almost exactly the phrasing that you just mentioned in your anecdote, because he was a genius pianist. And if he saw another great jazz pianist, he would say literally, "Oh, he can play." Yeah, yeah, he can play. And it's kind of eerie that it's almost the same sort of way the same choice of words that yeah they can play.
The, it's a little bit of a surprise, which means that perhaps means also that perhaps the Neapolitan school, in a sense, or Neapolitan tradition. I call it school because there were several teachers and students, one after the other, that I have rediscovered in these years. So the Neapolitan school was probably at the beginning of the 18th century, was perhaps a little bit isolated from the rest of the
Mm,
nation. Let's call it from
right.
the other places like Rome or Venice, right? And that's another point that made my research a little bit difficult at the beginning, but also exciting, because when we talk, as you were saying, right, string sonata or string concerto, we connect this uh, with Italian centers like Rome, like Venice, like Bologna, for example. So it's not immediately coming to mind the connection between string sonata of the 17th, 18th century and Naples, because most of the scholarship has concentrated on those centers, right?
Mm,
Not on Naples.
right.
Uh, but the discovery through the archival work that I have done is that Naples was growing, in a sense, this local tradition, but there were also connections with the other centers.
Mm,
So there are some characteristics that are similar, for example, to the Roman tradition. The use of counterpoint, for example, in several of these
they
sonatas.
look so close on the map.
Yeah,
Naples and Rome.
well, they were very close, actually. Um, Alessandro Scarlatti came to Naples in 1684 from Rome, and he became, and actually, Naples in the 17th century, 17th and 18th century, at least the first part of the 18th century, was was dominated by a viceroy. It was not an independent kingdom, right? So there
Mm,
was a viceroy, a Spanish viceroy, and the Spanish viceroy very often was the previous Roman ambassador. Spanish ambassador in Rome. So they started with that office as a Spanish ambassador in Rome, and very often they were promoted to viceroy of Naples. So the connection between
oh.
Rome and Naples was not only cultural, musical, artistic, but also political. It's
Yeah,
very
the name of your book, String Virtuosi in 18th Century Naples, Culture, Power, and Music Institutions. Maybe we should talk about that, the culture and the power. So wait. So you said Spanish? So Naples wasn't ruled by Italians at that time; it was ruled by the Spanish.
yes, was under the domination. Naples had been dominated for centuries by French, by Spanish. The Spanish domination lasted for almost 3 centuries. And
Wow.
what is interesting is also that, in fact, that's the title refers also to the connection that there is between the development of string music, instrumental music, and the political aspects of this.
Mm,
Uh, because the beginning of the 18th century is a very interesting, the turn of the century is a very interesting
mm,
moment. Usually, if you see, the studies, usually scholars we tend to look at uh, one century or another century, but the turn
mm,
of the century is the moment usually in which something happens very important and interesting. And for Naples was a very lively and also problematic moment politically, because in 1702 the Spanish domination ended because of the
mm,
War of the Spanish succession, and my cover has a painting we can maybe describe
Oh
later.
yeah, yeah.
So the Spanish domination ends in 1702, and the French arrive with Philip V for very few years, actually, because in 1707 the Austrian domination starts. So you see that there is this section, and then in 1734 again the Spanish come back, but starts a completely new chapter for the Neapolitan, for Naples, because Naples becomes a kingdom, independent kingdom in 1730.
Mm,
So those are very years of transformation, of change, political change. And you see that the music and the musicians adapt to necessarily,
mm,
because the power was really, uh, you know, controlling. It
mhm.
was determining the culture, the artistic culture of the time.
Here's the painting from the cover of your book.
Yeah, this is a detail of a once was a very large painting. We are left with a draft that is very small. So this is a detail that describes this celebration of the end of the War of Spanish Succession. So basically,
Mm,
in Spain, the king of Spain dies without heirs, and so a big war starts with all the powers of European powers to, find the redistribution of power in Europe. And here it's interesting because this war, this painting actually describes the peace at the end in 1713, and there is a little detail in the background that shows the Gulf of Naples. And
let me try and bring it up again.
yeah, sorry. And the Gulf of you see the Vesuvius. It's really
All right.
over there, right? The Vesuvius with the Gulf of Naples, and in the on the side there is the a siren, right, emerging from the water and playing the violin and singing,
Yep.
right? And
Yeah.
that is Partenope. That is the mythological founder of Naples, the siren Partenope.
Oh.
The legend says that she died on the coast of Naples, and for this reason, Naples was created in that spot. This is the Greek mythology. What is interesting for me, and that's why I chose this. In fact, the book originally, I thought the book could be called the Violin of Partenope, because here is the siren, the symbol of Naples,
Mhm.
playing the violin, right? And
Yeah.
this is, in a sense, a symbol of the fact that the violin, the string players, were becoming really central and important in Neapolitan mythology, in a sense.
Right. 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 Okay. So we talked about a little bit about the history of Naples. Um, so why were there so many orphans in Naples? Was it part of this war of Spanish succession? Was Naples a part of the war? Were there famines, earthquakes, plagues? What sort of things were happening in Naples at the time so
Yeah.
that swelled these conservatories with children?
Absolutely. Well, the war certainly contributed to that, but this was a endemic problem that you find already in the 17 and even earlier. Naples was a very important port in the Mediterranean, but so you find that it was open to contacts and communications with all different populations in the Mediterranean. Um, but it was also a very poor, in a sense, city. It was dominated, as I said, by centuries of Spanish domination. So you have natural phenomena like the eruption of the volcano
Mm,
that now is silent, but had been a very dramatic and a very, very scary presence for centuries, and then famine, and then the plague, yes, constant wars. So this, and also phenomenon of the society, like prostitutions, unfortunately. So you had all this, and you could see during the 16th, 17th century, really uh, large groups of abandoned children in the city, going around without any future, and in some cases dying in the city. It's a phenomenon that you find also in other centers like Venice, for example, and that's why in Venice you found the creation of the ospedali. So at a certain point in the 16th century, they some religious orders started to put the question: what should we do with these children that are abandoned in the streets?
Mm.
And so they opened this as orphanages, basically, to give a trade, to give a future to these abandoned children. It was a very sad situation, but it was a very clever, at the same time, good solution in a sense to the problem. It happens that we have a lot of conservatories in Naples at that time.
Conservati, right? That's
Yeah,
the
conservare. Conservare now it means to preserve, and many things that conservatory means to preserve the music. And it's not. They were preserving the children. They were preserving
that's
the
I had
health.
no idea. The first time I heard that, I was like, wow.
Yeah,
That
it,
is really interesting.
I think, I mean, many scholars have done a great job on describing this. I think one of the most recent books is um, Professor Gerdingen's book on the children, right? And they were preserving the health and welfare of these children. So
Mm.
initially, it was had nothing to do with music at all. Then they discovered, and they started to think, well, we have all these children, we have a lot of demand, musical demand,
Mhm.
in the churches in Naples. Why don't we put the two things together? Why don't we
Yeah.
train these children as musicians? And the interesting thing that happened, that differentiated the conservatories, Neapolitan conservatories, from Venetian ospedali, for example, is the fact that in Naples, in the conservatories, most all boys were trained into music, while in
Mm.
Venice, mostly they were mostly girls. And this,
Mm.
at the time, made a difference, because the gender difference meant that the boys in Naples could become professional musicians.
Mm.
And that's the secret of the Neapolitan Conservatory, the specializing into training boy uh, musicians and making them professional musicians.
That's different from Vivaldi, right? Vivaldi was teaching girls. Were they orphans or were they just young girls?
They were a mixer, as in the Neapolitan conservatories. By the way,
Mm.
at the beginning they were only orphans, but then when they started to become more like music schools, then
Mm.
we see both in Naples and in Venice, um, especially in Naples, actually, uh, students enrolling, paying a fee to get into the school.
Mm.
In Venice, there were these girls that were mostly abandoned, and they were raised in the monastery. And Vivaldi, yes, was teaching only these girls.
Mm.
Very interesting, because they could only play behind metal grid. They could not be seen
Mm.
by the audience in Venice. While in Naples, they were trained for 8, 10 years, and
Mm.
then they became professional musicians. It's very
Mm.
interesting. I have done a lot of work, and I'm still doing, actually, in these days, working on notarial archives. because the conservatories had a notary who would draft a legal contract with the figlioli, with the young students, saying, their name, their age, where they were coming from, how much time would they serve in the conservatory. So it's
Is
very,
that well preserved? Is all of that information well
yeah, yeah,
preserved?
yeah.
Wow.
We still have quite a bit of these documents from the notary of the time of the conservatory, and I'm working on the Conservatorio della Pietà in Naples in particular. And yes, we have all these documents with all the names, the age, and the
Wow.
time they spent, and they give us a lot of information about the training of these children who would spend, from age 8 or 9, would spend 10 years inside that institution without going out
Hmm.
before becoming professional musicians. So there was, on one side, there was the great thing that they could become professional musicians, but there was a lot of exploitation, right? Labor,
Hmm.
child labor involved in
Hmm.
this, because they would spend years and years uh,
Yeah.
serving the conservatory.
Yeah. You said become professionals, not just professionals, the best. Like there's a
Some of
difference.
them, yes, some of
Yeah.
them became the best, absolutely. And I mean, that's why I decided for the title of this book, String Virtuosi, right? So
Virtuosi.
they were not only string players, but some of them became really exceptional virtuosi.
Mm.
And I think, I mean, the best example you can find is in the cello players in particular. We have
Mm.
a score of cello players in the early 18th century who became very famous as virtuosi and as pedagogues, actually,
Mm.
because you have, for example, Francesco Alborea, who was perhaps the most famous cello players in Europe in his time. He started in Naples. He went, yes, beautiful. That's a beautiful image of him. He started in Naples. He entered very young in the royal chapel, and then he was called by the emperor to Vienna, and the emperor had to wait years because Alborea didn't want to move from Naples. And finally, probably because Charles VI gave him a very good salary, he decided to move to Vienna, and there became really probably the cello player of chamber group of Charles VI. We know for sure that he was very much in touch and in confidence almost with the emperor. He was the most esteemed cello players in Austria and Vienna at the time, and in all Europe. There are legends about this cello player, and how some changed from moved from viola da gamba to cello because they heard Alborea, Francischiello, they called him, little Francis in Neapolitan, Francischiello. They called him.
How well known is he today?
Alborea is known by certainly by all the cello players.
Okay.
I think is well known, not to the general audience, because unfortunately we have only left thus far. I am always optimist. I only left with two sonatas by him.
Okay.
So he was famous. We have chronicle of his work around Europe and his talent as a performer, but we don't have large testimonies of his production as composer, and this
Mm.
means that we cannot play his music, right? And this
Mm.
makes him a little bit less known. There is always this aspect that, in a sense, I've tried to change the idea that we need to deal with the composers, but actually the performers were as important, if not more important, than the composers. Sometimes they were the same person, by the way, but performers were the ones who transmitted the music around, right? We
Right.
in an era without
Since
radio and internet, etc.
with that joke, right, that the all actors get everything and the writers are usually in the back. They don't get anything.
Right.
Scarlatti declared that only an angel in human form could play in such a charming way, and he was praised by Quantz, Benda. So big, huge, big names, very big names. So this is a real giant we're talking
Yes,
about here.
they all talk about Francischiello and his talent and how this was influential for their music. Absolutely.
Was he an orphan?
Um, we don't know.
Okay.
uh, I think that he was he. I mean, we know that he enrolled in the school, but we are still recovering the full details of his life. Definitely.
Why I ask is because let's talk about social mobility now and
Mhm.
patronage and these
Yeah,
sorts of things. So it's astounding that you can, like, a very sad, tragic beginning. You're an orphan and you grew up in a very difficult sort of situation, child labor in the conservatory. You're practicing for 10 years, and then you're rubbing shoulders with the emperor. I mean, that's a
right.
big jump. That's an
This
enormous jump.
um, right, and this, has been said of some castrati, for example. Right, Farinelli is an example, but this happens very frequently with instrumentalists as well. So, for example, Alborea was not coming from Naples; he was coming from the provinces. We can call this from the outskirts of the kingdom of the viceroy, actually. And for example, another case very clear is again Marchitelli, the first violin of the Royal
Mm,
Chapel. He came from Villa Santa Maria, which is a tiny, was at the time, especially a tiny village in on the Adriatic coast. And he came to Naples, entered the conservatory from coming from a very poor family. He was not an orphan, but his conditions, initial conditions, were of extreme poverty. And then he found through music the way of becoming the first violin of the Royal Chapel, which means the most important violinist in Naples, in touch, constant touch with the viceroy, because the Royal Chapel was the resounding symbol of the power of Naples.
mm,
He was following all the ceremonies, official ceremonies of the viceroy in Naples, and he was the leader. Let's not forget that the chapel there. When I say Royal Chapel, I mean the Royal Chapel Ensemble. No, that's the expression that we use to indicate the uh, musicians of the royal palace. Let's not forget that those groups were playing without a conductor, right? So the first
mm,
violin was really the leader of the group.
mm,
And he became extremely rich because he was, supported by all the aristocracy, by viceroys, and by all the aristocracy of Naples. And um, he was so, uh, had wealthy in a sense that he could sometimes support other musicians. He would
mm.
give money to musicians in moment of problems and difficulties. He was very, in a sense, very generous to support others.
Can I
Um,
just ask you a question? How do you
yeah,
know all of this? I like, is there like, I'm
I,
just,
I
I
was
mean,
there. I was there. No,
you were
uh,
there.
Well, this is
So I'm curious about the sources. Where do you find this information?
yeah, yeah, and actually that's a beautiful question because I love to talk about the sources. Because one thing that I had to do at the beginning was going back to the primary sources, to the
Mm,
documents in the archives. But I also found out uh, very early, likely, that there was a in Naples there is a very unusual, in a sense, and unique archive, which is a bank archive. This archive preserves the bank accounts of large part of the population from the 16th century to nowadays.
wow.
It's an immense, infinite number of documents, so it is scary to go there and do research. But when I started, I was one of the earliest music historians to go there because um, art historians had done some work there
Mm,
because they had understood that if you want to find the commission of a painting, for example, a bank archive is perfect because you find all the payments of the
mm,
aristocratic people or the patrons to the artist. And this is what I did basically. I said, well, if the art historians have done this for painters and artists, why can I do the same? Cannot do the
mm.
same with musicians, right? And this is how I discovered most of the life of Pietro Marchitelli. Because, of course, I mean, you might say, okay, the bank archive gives you the numbers,
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Like, how can you? Or do you?
but you
I guess you could infer. Oh, loaning out to Giuseppe here, loan out this, loan out to
yeah, exactly. The system at the time was helping, in a sense, historians because they had to put some kind of justification or a cause for the payment. So they would describe the payment in some cases for the reason of the payment. So this is very helpful for historians, of course. But you have also to read between the lines, in a sense, right? If Marchitelli was giving money to another violinist, he could give money because he was the leader, but he could give money when he says, "I give, I don't know, $100 from my own money." It means that he had money, right? And then you discover that he had some lands, that he had some investments. So you reconstruct a little bit the financial situation in a sense, but also the life and the interaction between these.
That's pretty amazing. I mean, do you like? Wait a second. Do musicologists know that this is something that you can do, or did you just figure it out yourself? I don't see. I can't imagine musicologists searching through bank archives.
Not many, not many. Who did that. Yeah, definitely. And you can imagine 30 years ago there were even less. Absolutely.
Mm,
The fact is that, as I said, this is a unique archive. There are not many archives of this kind around the world, and that's also a limitation. But definitely, you need to think out of the box when you start a research from scratch, right? When you don't have really other scholars who have done work before you, or not much at least. You have to figure out where I can find information, and everywhere is a good place to look for. Uh,
I bet you tell this to your students, right? Look what I'm doing.
oh, absolutely, absolutely, yes.
Look
Not
what
not
you have to do.
not because I'm a model, but because they need. I mean, everybody, every music historian, but I guess this applies to many
Yeah.
other professions, needs to think out of the box and try to figure out a way to find new perspectives, new
Mm,
ideas, evidence, and things like that. As a matter of fact, Geminiani's document, the document that I cited before, the fact that he was the first violin of this orchestra, I found that in one of these bank accounts. And it was a lucky discovery because I was browsing for other things and I found that document saying, we pay Francesco Geminiani such and such amount because he was playing in these operas for the theater in 1707. I said, oh, wow, that's amazing. This is the
mm,
first evidence that Geminiani was in Naples at that time.
mm. You know what's funny is I think like to play in a pub now, it's like, I don't know, $50 or something. I wouldn't be surprised if it's the same back then. They never raised the rates, you know.
Yeah, yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, yeah, you can do also that. That is a work that I have done in part, but you can discover, how much they were paid and why one performer was paid more than the other, and certainly it was because he was better, maybe of the other,
Mm,
or playing more frequently than the other.
yeah.
So yeah, you can reconstruct also the larger context in this sense.
So you brought up cellos earlier, and I had a lovely conversation with Professor Giovanna Barbati.
Yeah.
And but I want you to tell the story. You found by chance a manuscript that was really profound. So why didn't you tell that story?
Um, well, I found this manuscript that was laying in Monte Cassino, that the Monte Cassino Abbey, and that contained several works by early cello composers. And this is a large manuscript that include sonatas and the largest collection of passacaglia for cello, all by Neapolitan composers. A couple of them, Rocco Greco, who is the
Mm,
brother of Gaetano Greco, much more famous for the partimenti, right? And
mm,
Rocco was a cello player, was a bass player in Naples and teacher in Naples, and he put together this manuscript of sonatas and elaborations over liturgical works, and that's very, very interesting. And then Gaetano Francone is another one. We have published an edition with Giovanna Barbati, in fact, Gaetano Francone, because in that same manuscript, which is a huge manuscript, uh, he puts all these passacaglia for cello. So on the bass pattern of the passacaglia, he elaborates that bass pattern with the cello. And even more interesting in a sense, because I was able to connect the Neapolitan school of cello with the modernist school. In that manuscript, there are two cello sonatas by Giovanni Bononcini, so very important composer. And by the way, those are the only two cello sonatas by Bononcini that we know of. Bononcini
really? Wow.
Bononcini is a little bit like Alborea, was very famous as a cello player before being famous as a composer. And yes, and then, but we didn't have practically only one sonata attributed to him, but probably is not by him. But
Mm,
these two cello sonatas are absolutely, certainly by him. So these are the only two cello sonatas that I published in modern edition by Giovanni Bononcini. So it's a very rich
wow.
manuscript and very, very important. Also because, and I'm sure in your interview with Giovanna Barbati, you have talked about this. There are uh, there are connections with the partimento tradition. There are connection with it's really demonstrates a school of improvisation and elaboration at the base, at the cello. So it's very important to demonstrate, first of all, the great ability, the great talent and advanced skills of these technical skills of these musicians on the cello, but also to connect the cello performance not only with the solo performance, but
Mm.
with pedagogical tradition of the partimento or the improvisation over the bass line. So it's a very, very important turn in the consideration of the cello, I would say.
Was the 18th century, or rather the beginning of the 18th century, can it be considered a sort of golden age for strings?
Yeah, I think so. Looking at the history of the instrumental music in Naples, I think that those years were very, very productive and saw a flourishing of this virtuosi and of the repertoire. One aspect, one entire section, the second part of my book is in fact dedicated to another important element, that is the communication, the migration of these musicians, especially violinists, but also we have seen, right, cello players from Naples to other European centers. For example, I devote an entire two chapters actually to the beginning of the sonata, of the arrival, in a sense, of the Italian sonata, string sonata in Paris. And something that everybody recognized at the beginning of the 18th century in Paris, the Italian sonata started to spread and to become popular and important, and was uh, not always welcomed because the French tradition was very strong, instrumental tradition. But
Oh, you have to comment on that after this.
um,
The maybe the pushback from
yeah,
other cultures.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. But very few before me have underlined the fact that all the violinists that were in Naples, that were in Paris, the Italian violinists that were in Paris at the time, came from Naples, actually. There were three musicians, Giovanni Antonio
Mm.
Piani, Giovanni Antonio Guido, and Michele Mascitti, probably the most famous of the three, who were coming from Naples, from the Neapolitan conservatories. And they were all at the same time, in the same years, 1702, 1705, those are the years, in Paris, playing for the king, playing for the,
Mm.
Philippe Orléans, etc. So it's a fact that nobody has underlined before because it was not really known. And yeah, and they became very, very famous, very um, really agents of these changes that happened in Paris. But as I was saying, there was a pushback. Yes, definitely, because the French tradition, instrumental tradition, was completely different. We have this famous phrase during allegedly during a concert of Italian sonatas that says, sonata, che me veux-tu? What do you want from me, sonata? I don't understand this kind of music, because French musicians, French audience was used to connect music with a program, or with dance, or with opera. So, in other words, in a sense, either programmatic or functional music. The Italian sonata is music per se, right? It's music without a
Oh.
program. Is music abstract, in a sense, music.
Mm.
And this was difficult for the French audience and for the French musicians to understand. And at the beginning, there was a very much opposition to the Italian. Then, of course, there are also political aspects that are a little bit more complicated, but have to do with the French central, the unity of power, and the opposition between French and Italian powers and
Mm.
culture. Yeah.
This is gonna seem like a very I just like shows like I don't know anything, but like nowadays when you go to a concert, you sit down, you listen, everyone claps. It's like a recital. So was it the same back then, or was it like a dance? So if you wanted to play a violin sonata, what was the setting? Do you just did a bunch of aristocrats sit down and you just played it for them, or were they dancing, or what was the typical sort of functional
Well,
activity?
well, that's a complex question in the sense that you need to distinguish time and places, really. Because if you look at Naples, I would say that the general setting of music performance was either the royal chapel, so ceremonies in the church or outside or in the royal palace, or aristocratic families, aristocratic halls in a sense, right? And residences. We have, for example, for some of the cello players, like Supriani, that's another cellist that maybe
Mm,
we can talk about later. But we have documents that says Supriani played for this aristocratic family, for this aristocratic person, right, and patron. So this was the setting in Naples generally. But if you move to Paris and London, even more, you start to see instead um, settings, the first concert series. So, for example, some of these violinists would play at the Concert Spirituel, for example. There was a very famous concert series that was put together in the 1720s. Or there were aristocratic amateur players who would put together a concert series only for aristocratic families. But Paris is a very lively, in a sense, these musicians found in Paris what was not available in Naples, this kind of general concert scene, a place where you can perform for an audience, large
mm,
audience, which in Naples was not, at the beginning of the 18th century, was not yet available.
mm,
Uh, so it, the place, the circumstances, the use of music, of course, changes according to the place and to the time period
mm.
at the time. Yeah.
What's the difference between a virtuosi of the 18th century, and we have very fast playing violinists today. We have very tremendous technical musicians now. But what is there something that sets them apart from like the 18th century violins? I mean, did they
Yeah,
improvise, or what did they
yeah,
what did they do?
absolutely. Yeah, that's a great question. I think that the image of the virtuoso today is completely different from the virtuoso of the time of the 18th century. Today we have very talented performers, but the main point of difference is that virtuoso of the 18th century was considered as such when he was able not to necessarily to play fast or faster, right, and with a lot of technical complexity. But the real virtuoso was the one who could improvise on the spot, who could elaborate and even create entire compositions based on certain patterns or some general ideas. This was really the virtuoso. The old virtuoso was the one who could have that had these qualities. Had, for example, the ability of introducing very tasteful ornamentation, for example. So there are plenty of descriptions of um, virtuosi or bad performers who could not really introduce the tasteful ornamentation. For example, many were criticized because they introduced too much ornamentation that could, you know, distract from the structure of the music. So, of course, for some of us, especially for performers who wants to play this music, is a little bit frustrating to read. Uh, a good performance is the one who introduces tasteful ornamentation. Yeah, great, but what is tasteful?
Yeah, nothing's written down.
Right, and it's difficult sometimes to figure out, and that's why some of the sources that I mentioned before, some of the sources that we are rediscovering, are very important, because when we find an elaboration, or when we find, for example, this other manuscript that is a method, cello method, the Principi per suonare il violoncello by Supriani, right? Probably the first Italian method for cello. We find
Hmm.
also some guides to performance, how to interpret some works, how to elaborate on a melodic or a bass pattern, and those are very, very precious information for us, for historians, of course, very, very interesting and important, but even more, I would say, for performers, contemporary performers who wants to reconstruct the historical performance, right, the practice of the time.
Okay, so this is a German. This is Johann Mattheson.
Yeah.
Now, did he say that some Italian violinists or some Italian had the best Alemans?
Yeah, actually, Matheson said that, in his book, the Vollkommene Kapellmeister, Perfect Kapellmeister, he mentions Handel and Michele Mascitti, who is the
Oh,
Neapolitan who moved to Paris, has the best examples of Alemans that you can find. And this, I mean, Handel, yeah, of course, Handel. That's Michele Mascitti. Who is this guy? Yeah,
never heard that name in my life.
right, right. And in fact, Mascitti, I mean, Matheson is certainly an authority in this, and he was a contemporary of both, so very reliable and authoritative source. But we can judge the popularity of Michele Mascitti in France by the fact that he was also able to print and published 9 collections of sonatas in his life. He had a long life, certainly, almost centenary, but the fact that he published 9 collections of sonatas is astonishing for the time. Uh,
Collections, not nine sonatas, collections.
9 collections of sonatas. Uh, so, and if you think that, printing, publishing a collection of sonatas was expensive at the time, was not an enterprise that musicians wanted to do very often, because they distribute and let circulate this music manuscript, and this music was performed, and sometimes even performed once, and then uh, you go on, you play and perform and write more music. Mascitti instead published this huge number of collections, and at certain point of his life, toward the beginning, when he published Opus 2 and Opus 3, we think it's very likely that he didn't need any patronage, any aristocratic support, monetary, financial support to publish, which means that he was selling his music very, very widely in Paris. So this is the popularity of Mascitti.
Mm.
He was really, and we have, uh, composers and musicians, contemporary, saying, we are at the end of the 18th century, and Mascitti is still popular. It still has been played in aristocratic circles.
We have been denied these composers.
Yeah,
this
yeah.
is this
We
is
we
criminal.
we have we have now some collection, some recordings. Luckily, we
It's like
started.
Galuppi. I've never heard of the pianist Galuppi. So this is now the violinists. Now this is fantastic. You're saying about the recordings.
Yeah, Opus 8 and Opus 9 of Mascitti has been recorded by the Quartetto Vanvitelli. They did a very good job in doing these two recordings, and several sonatas have been recorded in other, single sonatas in other collections. So is certainly a composer that needs to be rediscovered. He was
Yes.
he was the first. One of this collection contains the first example of concertos, concerti grossi, to be sure, but the first collection of concertos in Paris. So I mean, it's not a secondary guy. Matheson was right. Handel and Pitti, the connection is important there.
Can I
But
just ask? Oh,
yeah,
sorry. No, you're saying.
no, just saying that there is still a lot of work to be done. I mean, there is still a lot of music that we are rediscovering that needs to be performed and is available. So, I mean, the work has just started in a sense. Unfortunately, because I mean, it's incredible because there's been already
Mm.
some decades of work, but there is still a lot to be done.
Can I ask you, when you were younger and you were in Naples, maybe you were a music student, um, I think it's pretty well known that everyone knows the Germans, Mozart, Bach, Beethoven. And I think lately, the last 20 years, there's been a sort of rehabilitation, I think, of Italian musicians. And we're starting to see they're returning in some ways to positions of prominence. Did that ever, in your mind, was there a sort of Neapolitan pride? Like, yeah, we are really a serious musical center. Or is it in classical music? Has it sort of felt like within the last 100 years or 150 years, well, it's all Germans, and we were not serious, not compared to them, and
Yeah,
and did you ever notice a transition in feeling of this, or have you noticed a great surge of interest in Italian musicians, specifically Naples?
yeah, yeah. Specifically Naples, yes, it's a very important point because I think um, yeah, the when I studied violin, I I played Bach, I played Mozart. For my final exam. I played a violin concerto by Mozart, not by Fiorenza or
Not my
any.
machete. Yeah.
Right. And there was certainly, for instrumental music, there was no awareness of the importance of the Neapolitan school. And
Even in Naples, so like you were saying,
even
like just
even in
off
Naples,
the radar. Yeah.
absolutely off the radar. And I must say that in the first years when I started, I was looked with some skepticism because they were saying, okay, well, Naples is opera really and sacred music.
Hmm.
uh, Sacred music is still unknown, to be true. We have a lot of work to be done, that needs to be done on that sector. But Naples was opera in the 18th century, and I was told sometime a few times, why are you dealing with this? That is really secondary stuff. It's not
Hmm.
really important. Because you are right. There was this bias toward the German tradition, the German
Hmm.
instrumental tradition, and this actually, you can notice this. There is another book published also by Cambridge by my friend and colleague Anthony Del Donna, who has published a few years ago, in a sense, the sequel of what my book is, the prequel, if you like, because he published this book on instrumental music in Naples in the second half of the 18th century. And he says very, very clearly, very well, that at that time, already in the second half, toward the end of the 18th century, the German tradition started to really impose itself, even in Naples. So Naples became provincial, became marginal toward the mainstream development of instrumental music that was centered in Vienna, Mozart, Haydn, and Beethoven, and so on and so forth. And they, in a sense, tended to create this narrative that, yes, I have seen change in the past 10, perhaps 20 years, thanks to the study on Naples, thanks to the study by, for example, American musicologists like Daniel Hertz, who have studied even for opera the importance of Italian composers. Like with the Galant style, we discovered that the Galant style did not come from, or the classical style did not come uh, from Bach directly, or Bach, but it came from the Galant style, from the Neapolitan composers like Durante, Vinci, Porpora, etc. Right? You mentioned Haydn studies with Porpora.
Yeah.
Uh, so yes, we have changed a little bit the perspective. We now know that the Italian uh, both operatic and instrumental tradition was extremely influential for the development of the so-called classical and even romantic tradition
Mm.
that developed later. The Neapolitan phenomenon, in particular the instrumental tradition of Naples, is relatively new and recent because, as I said, Naples was centering its attention on opera, and on the other side, instrumental music, Italian instrumental music, was centered on Venice, Vivaldi, or
Mm.
Rome, Corelli. Naples was a little bit marginal to this narrative. I
Mm.
think that we are, I hope at least, right, that we are rediscovering some very important figures, very important repertory. For the cello, I think that is fair to say now that they were the Neapolitan cellists that spread and helped the diffusion of the modern cello technique and modern cello
That's
approach
huge.
to Europe. Yes, I mean with their presence in Naples, in Vienna, in Paris, in London. There were Neapolitan cello players in London too. So they really introduced the cello, modern cello technique in Europe. And with the violinist, I think that having violinists in the Imperial Chapel in Vienna, having violinists in Paris, or even in England, uh, I think they were very, very influential in the
Mm.
development of those language, those style, and string technique at the time.
So as we are wrapping up, I just wanted to mention here this is Fuchs, and
Yeah.
is it is was one of the famous violinists a possible student of Fuchs?
It's Angelo Ragazzi was. We don't know if he was a student, but he was in close relation with Johann Joseph Fuchs. Angelo Ragazzi is another very, very, very interesting um, violinist and composer. There is beautiful music by him, concertos and sonatas, and he was really a composer who was connected with the Austrian dynasty, the Habsburg, because he started in Naples, then moved for a few years in Barcelona when Charles of Habsburg was
Mm.
the uh, archduke there, and then when Charles became emperor, he moved. Ragazzi moved into the orchestra of the Imperial Chapel, and he became one of the most important violinists there.
I
But
see Pietro Market. I see Pietro again.
Marchitelli, yes, yes,
Marchitelli.
he was a rival of Marchitelli in
Was he okay?
yeah, yeah, yeah. He tried to become the first violin of the Royal Chapel, but Marchitelli was more important, and it didn't,
Established, yeah.
yeah, more established, and didn't leave his position. But Ragazzi found in Vienna a lot of success. He was also a composer of masses that were performed by the Imperial Chapel, and we have testimony of the fact that one of his compositions was dedicated to Fuchs, so he knew Fuchs very well, and
Wow.
perhaps worked with Fuchs. And we have another very interesting and important testimony, a letter by Jomelli, who says is presenting, introducing Angelo Ragazzi to Padre Martini, a famous Bolognese teacher.
Oh, we love that guy.
Right, Padre Martini. And Jomelli writes in his letter, we have the letter to Padre Martini, saying, I introduce to you Angelo Ragazzi, who is I'm quoting by memory, who is a talented composer and contrapuntal scholar. So Jomelli considered Ragazzi as really a very uh, good composer, not only a violinist, but a good composer and a fairly well-known composer of the time.
Is that because counterpoint is, if you're good at counterpoint, you're regarded as a composer?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. There is certainly this tradition in Naples, and I know you have talked with many scholars about this. The counterpoint of Durante, Leo, these two schools, but the study of counterpoint was very rooted, deeply rooted in Naples. So, I mean, we don't have, I don't have, at least for now, direct evidence of the study of some of these violinists with Durante or with Leo, or their connection with other teachers, but they studied in the conservatory, and we know that all students or pupils and figlioli of the conservatory studied at some point counterpoint. And we have several of these sonatas, uh, in a sense, going back to the string sonata tradition, right? We have several of these sonatas that have large movements in counterpoint, almost fugal movements by these violinists. There is even a repertory of sonatas for 3 violins and bass, which is a little bit peculiar to Naples.
Yeah, what is that? What is that?
Yeah, we have a strange flourishing at the beginning of the 18th century of this repertory for 3 violins and basso continuo.
No viola, just the three
No viola,
violins.
just 3 violins. And this is unusual because the 3 violins tradition goes back to the 17th century, but there are very few examples. But in Naples, you find several composers. You find Marchitelli, Cailò, Ragazzi, Avitrano, several of them who composed this for this connection, for this scoring, right? And group of 3 violins. And what happens is that when you have the 3 violins, you have inevitably a more imitative
Hmm.
style, right? So the 3 violins interact with them, and there is a large use of counterpoint. Um, so these are very highly elaborate, contrapuntally elaborate sonatas. And it is a little bit a mystery. I don't have enough evidence to say where they were used. These sonatas, probably it was part of sacred ceremonies, or maybe pedagogical purposes. We don't know. We know certainly that there was a large interest, very very strong interest for contrapuntal writing from these Neapolitan composers that was manifested in this repertory.
I'd like to end it off by bringing it back to that anecdote, which I found very interesting and very, very nice to hear. Where is it Marchitelli smoked Corelli essentially? Now you
Yeah,
mentioned
you
you said
can put it this way. Yeah, Corelli would not be happy, and Corelli's scholars would not be happy about that. But yes, it's an
cut
anecdote.
him. Cutting contest. But you mentioned Scarlatti, Alessandro Scarlatti. So was he is popularly known as like the founder of the operatic, I guess the Naples School of Opera, I suppose, or just the Naples uh, School of Music. So it was he played keyboard, I know he probably sang. Did he play violin or anything, or was how direct is his influence on instruments in
Yeah,
Naples?
yeah. Well, no, I don't think we know that he played violin. He was an harpsichord player for sure, very talented as well, and operatic composer. Well, his influence on the instrumental music uh, there are two ways you can look at this. One is biographical in a sense, because he was working in Rome, as I mentioned before, right? In 1684, he was called to direct and to be the chapel master in Naples of the royal chapel. And in doing this, he brought with him a group of singers and instrumentalists, and one of them was a man by the name of Giancarlo Cailò, who became the most important violin teacher in Naples. He was a
Hmm.
Roman violinist. So you see
Okay.
again this connection between Rome and Naples. And for example, Alborea was studied with Cailò, and many other string players studied with Giovanni Carlo Cailò. So this is a direct influence, in a sense, biographical influence, because Scarlatti brought some Roman people, really,
Hmm.
as an instrumentalist in Naples, very influential. The other influence that he had in the, particularly in the instrumental music, is the fact that he connected more closely the sacred music, sacred repertoire that was played by the Royal Chapel, because he was the chapel master, with the theater orchestras, because he was interested in opera. So, in other words, he put together opera and sacred music in a sense, right? The two traditions, and opened up more opportunities for building up orchestra in orchestral music in Naples. So he was very influential in this sense. And as a matter of fact, my book deals with the string virtuosi, with the sonata mostly, but there is still, as I said, a lot of work to be done on the orchestras, for example, or on the concerto live
We
in
almost
Naples.
forgot this. We have to bring this up. Oh my goodness. Where is it? There's a beautiful picture that you shared with me. We can't not show this picture.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. The Royal Chapel. Yeah, this is the, I think, the only image of the Royal Chapel participating to a ceremony in 1733, 32, I think. Uh, and some says that the portrait is so precise that you can identify maybe some people even. Some say that in the middle, conducting there is Domenico Sarri, the chapel master of the time. But I mean, besides this, it's very, very, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful image, and you can
They're
understand.
kneeling. They're not on chairs. They're kneeling.
No, they are kneeling. They are kneeling. They are following the ceremony really,
Hmm.
and they are. This is a huge. This is a tiny detail of a huge painting. And in the central part you have the depiction of the viceroy participating to this
Hmm.
ceremony. And it's very interesting that on this side there is this group of musicians. So when I said that, culture and power, this is culture and power, and the music expression of the power of the viceroy, the royal chapel
Hmm.
playing for and accompanying the ceremony of the viceroy in Naples.
Yeah. Beautiful picture. Really,
Yeah,
really wonderful picture. That was fantastic.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Well, I think maybe the last thing, I think, oh, there's just one more thing here. There's a list of Neapolitan. Is this a list here that we?
Yeah,
Um,
it's I put together a list of these uh, um, recordings. Is by no means is complete, so I hope I didn't forget or put aside other um performers and recordings. And I want to take this opportunity to say that, our work as musicologists, as music historians, is important to rediscover the repertory, to rediscover these protagonists of this music. But even more important, and perhaps the ultimate goal of our work, is to have this music recorded, performed, presented in concerts, because this is not music for museum, right? This is
mhm.
live music. This is music that needs to be performed, needs to be enjoyed as music. First of all, there is a lot of wonderful recordings. There is a lot of wonderful repertory. So I hope that this could become, in a sense, a little bit more mainstream music and performed more frequently in concerts.
Yeah. Well, why don't you do you have concluding thoughts on I think that would be lovely. And yeah, I mean, wouldn't it be great if young violin students today, when they learn the violin, instead of maybe what we have as mainstream, which is nothing wrong with it. There's a lot of the mainstream is very nice, but perhaps maybe we could also have some of these, maybe the originals, the Neapolitans, the so what sort of works would you recommend for students? And maybe you can also end that with some concluding thoughts.
Yeah, I think this study could be helpful in two directions. One is the uh, truly pedagogical aspect, and I think that some friends and colleagues have done and are doing a lot of excellent work in this sense. The work of Giovanna Barbati, or the work of Giorgio Sanguinetti on the partimento, on the improvisation, on establishing a new, or Peter Van Tour, Rosa Cafiero course. So the establishing uh, and recovering this repertory in a way that could be available also for study for the younger generation, and to maybe some young students can start cello, baroque cello or baroque violin directly on these pedagogical treatises or pedagogical methods and tools, and learning directly, instead of going through the, as I did, for example, right, going through the mainstream
Mhm.
training and then discovering this other side. So one aspect of this could be really the pedagogical application, modern pedagogical application of this repertoire. And the other side that I really enjoy, for example, working with performers, and I will not name names here, because there are so many that are doing this wonderful job of playing and recording this music. I think is really bringing back this repertory to the audience, modern audience, to first of all to enjoy the music, the beauty of this music, and then maybe even to compare and to contrast the style of these musicians with the music that we are more familiar with, and you will discover that there are some analogies. You have some, you can reconstruct some contacts between these traditions, or you can establish also some uh, diversity, some new aspects that the so-called mainstream music does not offer. So really, for me, and maybe this could be a concluding thought, if you like. For me, as a musicologist, as a music historian, it is fascinating to go, and then it is thrilling to go in the archives and to rediscover the lives of these musicians, because it's really uh, too important for me, and exciting to reconstruct all the context, the life, and the activity and career of these musicians. But at the same time, it's even perhaps more important to rediscover the repertory and to bring back the beauty of music, of this music, to larger audience. So I hope that uh, we can create more and more this collaboration between music historians, musicologists, and performers and scholars of historical performance.
The book is String Virtuosi in 18th Century Naples, Culture, Power, and Music Institutions, 30 years of research and preparation. The great Professor Guido Olivieri, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. It has been a pleasure. Thanks.